The corridor of Scintille 8 stretched before Adrian Vork like a decaying artery. Emergency lights flickered in irregular patterns, casting rust-red shadows across the frost-covered walls. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he trudged forward, the sound of his boots echoing through the abandoned station. The only other noise was the labored wheeze of the air recyclers, struggling to maintain minimum life support. 3 centuries after the great expansion of the Acer Empire across the galaxy, this derelict prison station had become nothing more than a forgotten relic, drifting in the void. The nearest star had aged into a red dwarf, bathing everything in a bloody crimson glow that made the oxidized metal surfaces look as though they were weeping. Adrian adjusted his toolkit over his shoulder, the familiar weight of his equipment offering little comfort in this forsaken place. His salvage engineer uniform was covered in patches and stains, evidence of years spent repairing and scavenging in the most dangerous corners of the galaxy. His hands, rough with dark scars from plasma burns and metal shards, tightened around the handle of his most prized possession, an ancient, rusted sword he'd named Conscience. The blade was a relic from Earth's corporate wars, utterly primitive compared to the molecular disruptors and plasma weapons of today's military. His colleagues never failed to mock him for carrying such a useless antique, but Adrian found its weight reassuring. In a galaxy dominated by technology so advanced it seemed like magic, there was something honest about a simple blade of metal. Today's maintenance route took him through Sector 7, a rarely visited section of Scintille 8. His job was simple: check the mechanical failures, ensure the air recycling and power systems were still functioning, and perhaps salvage a few valuable components to trade in the Rim territories. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, just another day for an anonymous repair technician. But Sector 7 felt different. The walls here were older, the design more archaic. As Adrian's light swept across the corridor, he noticed the skeletal remains of prisoners who had died in forced labor, their bones partially embedded in the metal floors after centuries of neglect. Uranium dust had accumulated in the crevices, glowing with a faint, eerie luminescence. History records mentioned that Scintille 8 was constructed 300 years ago as a repository for rebels, criminals, and people deemed valueless to the Empire. Among the fragmented records, there were scattered references to a resistance officer named Lena Sarayer, but almost everything about her had been methodically erased. As Adrian traversed a particularly desolate hallway, the emergency lights flickered more violently, and the air recycler emitted a high-pitched whine, as if it might fail at any moment. That's when he spotted it, an unusual hatch in the wall. Unlike the other access panels he'd encountered, this one bore the hallmarks of much older technology, dating back at least 3 centuries. Its surface was made of an unusual alloy that seemed impervious to the decay affecting the rest of the station. Adrian ran his scanner over the hatch, puzzled by the readings. According to his device, the metal shouldn't even exist. It was composed of molecular bonds that defied standard material science. The access panel had no visible controls, only faint traces of symbols that had been deliberately scraped away. Out of professional curiosity, Adrian tried his plasma cutter on a small corner of the hatch. The energy beam, capable of slicing through reinforced hull plating, merely glanced off the surface with a shower of harmless sparks. He tried his molecular disruptors next, then industrial-grade lasers, all to no effect. Standing before this immovable door, Adrian felt a pang of empathy for whatever had been sealed away so thoroughly. In a moment of whimsy, or perhaps intuition, he unsheathed Conscience, the rusted sword his colleagues had ridiculed for years. With a half-hearted swing, he struck the edge of the hatch. To his astonishment, a spiderweb of fractures appeared where the ancient blade had made contact. The cracks spread rapidly across the surface of the hatch, accompanied by a sound like breaking glass. Then, with a final groan of protest, the hatch swung open. Cold, Stale air rushed out as emergency lighting automatically activated inside the chamber. Adrian stood frozen in disbelief, staring at his rusted sword. How had this primitive weapon succeeded where cutting-edge technology had failed? The chamber beyond was circular, its walls covered in what appeared to be hand-carved writing. Motion sensors detected Adrian's presence, triggering additional lights that revealed the chamber's occupant. In the center of the room, suspended by glowing molecular shackles that seemed to penetrate her very atoms, was a woman. Her skin had a deep blue tint, and though her body was emaciated from centuries of imprisonment, her muscles still showed evidence of military training. Her eyes, when they opened to the sudden light, held an intensity that made Adrian take an involuntary step backward. "Who are you?" The woman's voice was hoarse from disuse, but there was a commanding quality to it that belied her weakened state. Adrian struggled to find his voice. "I'm Adrian Vork, a salvage engineer assigned to this sector." Her eyes narrowed. "Why have you come?" The question seemed to carry more weight than a simple inquiry about his presence, as if she were asking why fate had chosen him specifically. Adrian hesitated, then gave the only answer that felt true. "Because you're not garbage to be forgotten." The woman studied him for a long moment. "My name is Lena Serrier, commander of the 3rd Special Forces Regiment of the Acer Empire." Her gaze fell to the rusted sword in his hand. "That blade. Try it on these chains." Adrian approached cautiously, raising conscience to the nearest molecular shackle. The moment the rusted metal touched the advanced restraint, the shackle disintegrated like ash, one by one. He struck each binding until Lena Serrier stood free for the first time in 3 centuries. She stumbled forward, her atrophied muscles struggling to support her weight. Adrian caught her arm, surprised by how cold her skin felt. "Why would this work when nothing else would?" he wondered aloud. Lena's lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "Some technologies are designed to resist other technologies, but they have no defense against the simplicity of the past." As Lena steadied herself, Adrian took in the chamber more fully. Every surface was covered in carved names, dates, and symbols. Seeing his interest, Lena explained. 300 years gives one time to remember. Every name you see is someone who stood against Empire orders. Mullen, age 7, died in the stone mines. Sergeant Kia Rain, who took his own life rather than execute prisoners. Dr. Elena Vasquez, killed while tending to wounded insurgents. Her fingers traced the carved letters with reverence. "I refuse to let them be forgotten. This cell became my memorial of lives." She directed Adrian's attention to a particular section of wall. "Here, my own story. I was commander of the 3rd Special Forces Regiment, elite troops of the Acer Empire. I received direct orders from the Supreme Admiral to eliminate the Bolarium refugee camp, thousands of women and children seeking asylum. I refused." Her voice hardened. "For that, the Erasers came, the Emperor's secret unit for disappearing problematic officials. No trial, no record, just erased." "And you've been here since?" 300 years, ordered by my own sister, Sina Serrier, the newly crowned empress." Lena's eyes reflected centuries of betrayal. She chose power over blood. Before Adrian could respond, an alarm blared throughout the sector. The emergency light switched to a deeper red, and the chamber door began to close automatically. "Security protocols," Lena explained, moving with surprising speed despite her weakened state. "Breaking my containment would trigger Unit 7L, an automated defense system." As if summoned by her words, a massive security robot appeared in the corridor, its silver armor gleaming under the emergency lights, its weapon systems powering up with an ominous hum. "Run!" Adrian shouted, pulling Lena toward a side passage. "No," she countered, extending her hand. "Your sword. Give it to me." Something in her tone made Adrian obey without question. He handed over Conscience, watching in amazement as Lena seemed to transform before his eyes. Despite her emaciated frame, Her movements became fluid and precise, guided by muscle memory that 3 centuries of imprisonment couldn't erase. Unit 7L fired a plasma burst that should have incinerated her instantly. Instead, Lena twisted the rusted blade at an impossible angle, somehow deflecting the energy back toward the robot. The machine staggered as its own weapon's force rebounded against it. Lena used the moment of disruption to close the distance, moving with preternatural speed. The rusted sword shouldn't have been able to penetrate the robot's advanced armor, yet it sliced through the metal shell as if it were paper, severing critical sensor arrays. Unit 7L collapsed in a shower of sparks and molten components. Adrian stood speechless as Lena returned the sword to him. "How did you—" "I was trained to use the weapon at hand," she said simply. "We need to move. More security systems will activate soon." They navigated through darkened corridors, littered with prisoner remains. Lena moved with purpose, occasionally entering small compartments to activate ancient pressure systems that would allow them to access the airlocks. "Where should we go?" Adrian asked, as they approached his personal shuttle docked at the station. The Rim territories might be safe, but the Empress's bounty hunters could follow. The old resistance bases, if they still exist. "They don't," Lena cut in. 300 years changes everything. She activated the communication array on Adrian's shuttle, scanning frequencies with practiced efficiency. "For the first time in centuries, I hear voices from outside." The only responses were automated distress signals and Imperial broadcasts, a galaxy of communications with no one answering her specific call. Lena listened intently to the Imperial news channels. The Day of Remembrance is approaching, a ceremony on Acer Prime where the Empire honors its heroes. Her expression darkened. A perfect opportunity to reveal the truth. If Empress Cena still rules, I will confront her before the entire galaxy. Adrian looked at her with concern. "They'll hunt you to the edges of the galaxy. They could deploy entire fleets." "Without that day, the truth dies forever," Lena replied, her resolve evident in every line of her face. "Will you help me, Adrian Vork? Or will you return to your salvage roots?" Looking at this woman who had endured 3 centuries of isolation rather than compromise her principles, Adrian felt something stir within him, a hunger for justice that his life, as an anonymous engineer, had never satisfied. "I'll help you," he said, powering up the shuttle's engines. "Acer Prime it is." The journey to Acer Prime was fraught with tension. They traveled through less monitored shipping lanes, relying on Adrian's knowledge of Imperial patrol patterns and Lena's strategic mind. Along the way, Lena absorbed 3 centuries of history through data feeds and archived reports, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. "The Empire has only grown stronger," she observed. "Dissenters are caught before they even speak. Thought monitoring in public spaces, emotion scanners in gathering places." She gestured to a holographic display showing the capital world. "Look at it. Perfect order. Perfect control." Acer Prime was a marvel of Imperial engineering, gleaming towers reaching toward the sky, pristine atmospheric generators creating a perpetually clear blue atmosphere, citizens moving along designated paths with military precision. Propaganda displays dominated every surface, proclaiming the glory of Acer supremacy and the benevolence of the ruling family. "How do we even begin?" Adrian wondered aloud. "We knock on the Black Sheep's door," Lena replied cryptically. Their first contact came in the form of Kira Thane, a 20-year-old with silver blue hair and eyes burning with idealism, the granddaughter of a veteran who had shared stories of Commander Lena in her youth. Kira had grown up venerating a woman she believed long dead. When Lena appeared before her in the back room of a maintenance facility, Kira's shock quickly transformed into fierce devotion. "I can't believe you're real," she whispered, reaching out but stopping just short of touching Lena, as if afraid she might dissolve into mist. "My grandfather told me about Balerium, about how you refused the order. He said that day changed everything for those who served, knowing an officer would sacrifice herself rather than harm innocents. Kira's enthusiasm was tempered by practicality. As part of an underground network of students, workers, and dissidents, she had access to communication channels outside Imperial monitoring and connections throughout the capital's underbelly. "The Day of Remembrance is in 3 days," she explained, pulling up schematics of the Central Plaza. "Every citizen will be there, mandatory attendance. The Empress herself will preside." Through Kira, they made contact with Garrick Voss, a 55-year-old former soldier with a scarred face and quiet demeanor. He had fought at Balerium Station and owed his life to Lena's refusal to bomb the civilian sectors. "Commander," he greeted her with a formal salute when they met in his underground mechanic shop. "They told us you were executed for treason." "A more efficient lie than the truth," Lena replied. Voss provided the first concrete evidence for Lena's claims, a tattered journal containing images of ship components and battleframe identification codes from the Balerium incident. "I kept records," he explained, "in case someone ever asked the right questions." With Kira's network and Voss's knowledge, they began to prepare. Kira printed maps of the Day of Remembrance ceremony, while her student associates produced hundreds of leaflets bearing Lena's image standing before the Empress, with the message, "She lives. She stands to reveal the truth." Their activities didn't go unnoticed. General Dorvit, Imperial Security Director, had received orders to find and eliminate any threat to the ceremony. His forces moved through the underground, suppressing dissent with ruthless efficiency. As preparations intensified, Lena found herself wrestling with doubts. In a quiet moment aboard Adrian's shuttle, she confessed her fears. "What if I'm being selfish?" she asked. "What if confronting Sina only brings more suffering?" Adrian, who had been modifying communication devices to broadcast on old frequencies that might bypass Imperial monitoring, set down his tools. 300 years ago, you made a choice that cost you everything," he said. "But it was the right choice. The truth is never selfish." Lena smiled faintly. "And what about you, Adrian Vork? Is this adventure satisfying your conscience? Or are you just another fool chasing heroism?" "I'm a nobody engineer who stumbled on history's greatest cover-up," he replied with a shrug. "Maybe I just want to see how the story ends." The night before the ceremony, the underground network gathered their resources: old-style radio transmitters, disguise equipment, and forged documents. Kira rallied her student groups, while Voss coordinated with the few veterans who still remembered Lena and were willing to stand with her. "The Empire has deployed the subspace surveillance grid," Voss reported. "All communications are being monitored. We'll have to use low-frequency analog signals to avoid detection." As the others finalized their preparations, Lena stood alone on a rooftop, gazing up at the artificially perfect sky of Acer Prime. "I've lived 3 centuries in hatred," she whispered to herself. "Is this worth it?" Kira joined her, the young woman's determination providing a stark contrast to Lena's weathered resolve. "You're not alone," she said. "We've been teaching people the song Broken Chains that Voss shared with us. When you appear, millions of copies of the leaflets will flood the plaza." Lena looked at her, seeing the reflection of her own younger self in Kira's passionate commitment. "Are you prepared for what might happen?" "I've been prepared my whole life," Kira answered. "Even before I knew you existed." The Day of Remembrance dawned with perfect weather, as it always did on Acer Prime, where even the climate bowed to Imperial will. The central plaza, filled with citizens moving in orderly lines, their expressions carefully neutral under the watchful eyes of surveillance drones. Military units performed precision drills, while the Imperial Band played Galactic Glory, the anthem of the Acer supremacy. Blue-silver flags bearing the Imperial crest hung from every building, and massive screens displayed images of heroes of the Empire, carefully curated faces representing military victories and Imperial expansion. On the main stage, surrounded by elite guards, sat Empress Sina Sarayer. Though 3 centuries had passed since she ordered her sister's imprisonment, imperial rejuvenation technology had kept her ageless, her face a cold mask of power. She wore elaborate ceremonial armor that glinted in the sunlight, her posture rigid as she surveyed her subjects. The ceremony began with the traditional recitation of imperial victories. Each announcement met with prescribed applause from the assembled crowd. As the list of honored heroes was read, Lena emerged from an underground maintenance tunnel at the edge of the plaza. She removed her hood, revealing her face to the surveillance cameras. Within seconds, her image appeared on the massive screens, a blue-skinned woman, painfully thin, yet unbowed, with conscience strapped across her back. A hush fell over the crowd as thousands of eyes turned toward her. Some of the older citizens, former military personnel who had heard rumors of the commander who defied orders, gasped in recognition. The younger generations stared in confusion at this unexpected disruption to the perfect ceremony. On the stage, Empress Sina froze, her face contorting with shock as she gripped the armrests of her ceremonial chair. Lena walked forward with measured steps, her voice amplified through the communication device Adrian had modified to hijack the plaza's sound system. I am Lena Sarayer, the woman who was exiled for refusing to kill children. Today, I stand before you to speak the truth that the Empire has buried. Imperial guards raised their weapons, but Sina held up her hand, signaling them to wait. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of centuries of power. Arrest this impostor immediately. She dishonors our celebration with treasonous lies. The crowd's reaction began as a murmur, then swelled. Older veterans, recognizing Lena from their service days, whispered her name with tearful reverence. Younger citizens, who had never seen her, reacted with confusion that quickly turned to curiosity. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice began to sing Broken Chains. Another voice joined, then dozens, then hundreds, the forbidden song rising from beneath the imperial fanfare. Throughout the plaza, people began to reach into hidden pockets, producing the leaflets that Kira's network had distributed. The image of Lena standing defiant before the Empress appeared everywhere, passed from hand to hand despite the guards' efforts to confiscate them. Garrick Voss and a handful of aging veterans took positions on either side of Lena, raising banners bearing the Broken Chains symbol, a fractured link that had become the underground's emblem of resistance. The Imperial soldiers found themselves in disarray, unsure whether to fire on civilians. Some removed their helmets and turned their weapons toward General Dorvit, who was shouting contradictory orders as the situation spiraled beyond his control. When a squad of security forces attempted to approach Lena, she drew Conscience with fluid grace. The rusted sword caught the sunlight, transforming into a beam of cold fire as she deflected plasma bursts with impossible precision. The ancient blade cut through armor joints, disabled energy shields, and left a path of disabled, but not killed, soldiers in her wake. The image of Lena standing amid a sea of dark uniforms, holding nothing but a rusted sword against the Empire's most advanced weapons, became an instant symbol of human will triumphing over technology. As the rebellion spread across the plaza, Kira led a group of students in pushing back the Imperial forces. She climbed onto a monument in the center of the square, waving the Broken Chains flag and inspiring those around her to stand firm. When soldiers fired plasma rifles into the crowd, Kira leaped from her position, intercepting a blast meant for a group of children. The plasma struck her directly in the chest, a fatal blow that sent her crumpling to the marble pavement, blood pooling beneath her. Lena rushed to Kira's side, cradling the young woman in her arms. Kira's eyes still shone with hope as she struggled to speak. I dreamed I would see you standing in the light, not as a ghost. She pulled a piece of rust-stained cloth from her pocket and pressed it into Lena's hand. You were my ideal. If you hadn't died, you would have made this real, Lena whispered, her voice breaking. Kira smiled faintly. I already did. Her eyes closed as she exhaled her final breath. The plaza erupted in chaos. Citizens threw stones and debris at the soldiers, who began a disorganized retreat. Smoke from disabled weapons and burning propaganda displays filled the air, creating a surreal battlefield atmosphere in what had been the Empire's most controlled environment. On the stage, Empress Sina found herself abandoned by her guards as the crowd's anger focused on the symbols of imperial power. She backed away, triggering an emergency evacuation signal, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. In that moment of chaos, as blood mingled with fire and centuries of suppressed truth burst into the open, Lena understood that this was not a complete victory, but it was the end of silence. In this single instant of disorder, truth had been revealed, and it could never be contained again. The immediate aftermath of the Plaza Rebellion found Lena severely wounded from plasma burns sustained during the fighting. She couldn't continue the battle directly. Adrian, though shocked by the day's violence, quickly transported her to a hidden bunker beneath the city, an old resistance safe house that Voss had maintained for decades. As her injuries worsened, Lena began the process of recording everything she remembered. Using a small data core that Adrian had salvaged from his ship, she documented her testimony about the Balerium Tribunal, copies of her orders, her refusal, and the names of those who had been sacrificed. I won't survive much longer, she told Adrian, as infection spread through her weakened body. But the truth must... Adrian worked tirelessly, making multiple copies of Lena's data and distributing them through the underground network. He uploaded the information to old frequency bands, embedded it in maintenance orders for naval vessels in the Rim, and inserted it into the automated news feeds that ran throughout the Empire. Though Imperial technicians scrambled to contain the spread of information, it was too late. The data spread like an oil slick across the galaxy, impossible to fully eradicate. 1 year after the Day of Remembrance, Acer Prime had changed. The broken chain symbol appeared everywhere, on walls, in coffee shops, carved into park benches. Citizens whispered, Lena lived, despite the propaganda system's efforts to erase her once again from history. Empress Sina, though not deposed, was forced to institute a civic assembly, a mandatory educational program on ethical reasoning and national conscience that included Lena Sarayer in the curriculum of every school. A course on ethical decision-making was established for military officers, teaching them their right to refuse unconstitutional orders. Adrian returned to the Rim territories, resuming his work as a spacecraft repair technician. But now, instead of merely collecting scrap metal, he had become a storyteller, recounting the sacrifices of Lena and Kira to sailors, workers, and travelers, keeping the flame of conscience alive. In an underground museum in the capital, a rusted sword named Conscience was displayed anonymously, accompanied by the inscription, "This blade never cut flesh, it cut lies." Each day, people left flowers and incense, a practice no longer prohibited by imperial decree. 100 years after the rebellion, historians at the Galactic Historical Institute debated whether Lena Sarayer had been a real person or simply a legend. The physical evidence, molecular traces of the rusted sword, remains of Centaur 8 prison, wall carvings, were cited as proof of her existence. A student asked her teacher, "Did she really fail? Everything still belongs to the Empire." The teacher replied, "The Empire didn't disappear, but it changed. When people learn to place conscience above orders, that's a permanent change." 40 years after Lena's rebellion, the conditions of the Empire remained. But officers found themselves frequently asking, what would Lena Sarayer think when confronted with morally ambiguous orders? One evening on Kepler 7's moon, an aged Adrian passed a broken chain link to his apprentice Zara, a 20-year-old engineer with the same curiosity he had once possessed. "Let no chains destroy your conscience," he told her. "Each day, You must choose between safety and integrity. Choice is the only path to freedom. The future remained ambiguous, but hopeful. Lena hadn't completely transformed the galaxy, but the seed of idealism she had planted continued to grow. Each generation could now ask themselves, do I dare to speak when everything tells me to be silent? On Adrian's personal shuttle, now piloted by Zara, a small display case contained a fragment of rusted metal, the tip of conscience that had broken off during the final battle. Beside it lay a handwritten note in Lena's script. 300 years of silence, 3 minutes of truth, both echo forever. As Zara piloted the ship toward the outer colonies, she often glanced at that fragment, wondering if she would recognize her moment of choice when it came, the instant when conscience must triumph over convenience, when truth must shatter the chains of comfortable lies. In the vastness of space, under the light of aging stars, the story of the woman who waited 3 centuries for justice continued to spread, not as imperial history, but as human truth, passed from person to person, heart to heart, an unbreakable chain of remembered courage. Lena Sarayer had not lived to see the full fruits of her sacrifice. But every time someone chose conscience over obedience, every time someone questioned an unjust order, her spirit lived again, a testament to the enduring power of a single voice that refuses to be silenced, a single blade that cuts not flesh, but the bonds of oppression. And somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos, perhaps the rusted sword, conscience, awaited its next wielder, someone else who would dare to stand against the darkness with nothing but the simplest of weapons and the strongest of convictions. For in the end, it wasn't the sword that broke the chains. It was the hand that wielded it, the human spirit that refused to surrender. No matter how long the night, no matter how powerful the empire, no matter how impossible the odds. 300 years, one swing, freedom.